This week, we have 3 new saints, a 16th century Jesuit moves closer to sainthood, and the Vatican Bank steps into the 21st century. Hello and welcome to this week's edition of Vatican Connections. We have 3 new saints this week. Pope Francis presided at the Mass of Canonization for Mother Laura Montoya, Maria Guadalupe Zavala, and Antonio Primaldo and companions. We'll have more on that Mass later in the program. Now, Vatican officials presented Pope Francis with the Vatican Yearbook and the Annuario Pontificio this week. Vatican Television has more.
The 2013 Pontifical Yearbook and the Statistical Yearbook were presented to the Holy Father on Monday morning. Globally, the number of Catholics has increased from 1.19 billion in 2010 to 1.21 billion in 2011, with an increase in Africa and Asia. The presence of the diocesan and religious priests has also increased in the last decade by passing from 405,000 in 2001 to 413,000 in 2011. Europe, in contrast to the global average, has seen a decline in numbers in the past decade. The number of professed women religious is dramatically down. The number of candidates for the priesthood is up. The Holy Father expressed keen interest in the data he was shown and his gratitude to all those who contributed to the new edition of the 2 yearbooks.
The Biennale di Venezia is a world-renowned art festival founded in 1895. Exhibits and expositions showcase the latest innovations in art, architecture, music, theater, and dance. Now, for the first time ever, the Vatican will have a pavilion at the Biennale. The theme of the Vatican's pavilion? In the beginning. And the first 11 chapters of Genesis are the inspiration for the exhibit. Cardinal Gianfranco Ravasi of the Pontifical Council for Culture and the director of the Vatican Museums, Antonio Paolucci, have been working together to make the exhibit possible. 3 artists have been commissioned to create works for the exhibit on 3 different themes: creation, uncreation, and recreation. At a press conference, Cardinal Ravasi said the pieces will not be overtly religious. The Biennale runs from June 1st to November 24th. Now, the Vatican's Institute for Works of Religion, better known as IOR, or the Vatican Bank, has been working to have increased transparency and come into full compliance with international anti-money laundering rules. Now, the head of the IOR, Ernst von Freiberg, has announced that the bank will have its own website by the end of 2013, and its balance sheets will be published on that website along with other documents. Von Freiberg was appointed in the last days of Pope Benedict's pontificate. One renowned Jesuit has come a step closer to sainthood. The diocesan phase of the cause of canonization for Matteo Ricci was closed this week. Now the cause moves to the Vatican for further study. We'll have more details on his cause for canonization coming up in the next segment. Finally, Pope Francis's pontificate was consecrated to Our Lady of Fatima this week. After his election, Pope Francis asked the Patriarch of Lisbon to make this consecration happen, because every year a special Mass is celebrated at the Sanctuary of Fatima on May 13th, which is the day that the apparitions first began to the shepherd children. This year, during that Mass, the Patriarch of Lisbon consecrated Pope Francis's ministry to Our Lady, and the Archbishop of Rio de Janeiro was concelebrating. He entrusted the success of World Youth Day to Our Lady. Now, why didn't Pope Francis consecrate his Petrine ministry to the Virgin of Luján, the patroness of Argentina? Because he already consecrated his episcopal ministry to her. Did you know there are at least 20 Jesuit saints and even more Jesuit blesseds? The cause for Matteo Ricci's sainthood was opened in the 1980s, closed, and then reopened again in 2010. As we mentioned earlier, the cause for Matteo Ricci's beatification is now in the hands of the Vatican's Congregation for the Causes of Saints. So what's the big deal about a 16th century Jesuit? Well, Cindy Wooden from Catholic News Service explains.
The sainthood cause of the great Jesuit missionary to China, Matteo Ricci, has arrived at the Vatican 403 years after his death in Beijing. The diocesan phase of his canonization cause initially opened in 1984 and was almost immediately closed down because there were questions about Matteo Ricci's commitment to pure Christianity. His cause embodies a lot of what we would call today questions about enculturation, the limits of how much of local cultural expressions and practices are compatible with Christianity. Since the Second Vatican Council, Catholics have spoken a lot about missionary work and enculturation, bringing the gospel to different peoples in a way that respects their culture, purifies some elements of their culture because of the demands of the gospel, but also using some of their cultural expressions to profess their Christian faith. Even 400 years ago, there were great missionaries like Matteo Ricci who recognized that you cannot bring the gospel of love and salvation to somebody that you don't actually love. That giving somebody the gospel and telling them the good news is something that is motivated and finds success because you're actually offering this out of love and respect for them. And so Matteo Ricci, I think, is a good example of how the first missionary act is showing love and respect for the other person. Then they'll be willing to listen to what you say. Then you will be offering them the good news that they need.
Let us raise our minds and hearts to Jesus Christ, the Lord of our life and of the future. May He pour out His Spirit upon us and upon the whole Church, that we may be a beacon of freedom, reconciliation, and peace for the whole world. I greet all the English-speaking young people present here today. As you return home, take back with you the good news of Christ's love, which we have experienced in these unforgettable days. Fix your eyes upon Him, deepen your knowledge of the gospel, and bring forth abundant fruit. God bless all of you until we meet again. Place a honor anunciar ahora que la sede de la próxima Jornada Mundial de la Juventud será Río de Janeiro.
Let's see what Pope Francis has been doing this week and who he's met with. On Sunday, the Holy Father presided over the canonization of 3 new saints. In his homily, he warned against what he called the gentrification of the heart, which happens when one gets comfortable with the way things are. He told the faithful to touch the flesh of Christ by caring for the needy, and he drew examples from the lives of the 3 saints he canonized. Now, one of the saints, Antonio Primaldo, is actually one of a group of 800 martyrs killed in Otranto, Italy in 1480 by invading Ottoman forces when they refused to convert to Islam. Referring to these martyrs, he prayed for all Christians in various parts of the world who are suffering violence, that God would give them the courage and fidelity to respond to evil with good. The next day, he met with the president of Colombia. The 2 men spoke about Saint Laura Montoya, the Colombian sister canonized on Sunday. They also spoke about the Church's contribution to creating what the Pope calls a culture of encounter in Colombia and the spiritual and human development of all Colombians. Wednesday was his general audience, and during his catechesis, he told the faithful there is no such thing as a part-time Catholic. He said if Catholics don't open their hearts to the Holy Spirit and let God purify them, quote, our Christian being will be superficial. As he was arriving at St. Peter's before the audience, he released 2 doves. It was an unplanned moment, and one of the doves didn't want to fly away. During his final comments at the audience, he announced that he will make a trip to Cagliari, Italy, to visit the sanctuary of Our Lady of Bonaria. Now here is that special moment from Vatican Television.
Vi vorrei annunciare che desidero visitare il santuario a Cagliari. Quasi sicuro sarà nel mese di settembre.
Pope Francis told pilgrims at the Wednesday audience that he wants to visit a shrine in Cagliari, Sardinia, probably next September. He explained that there is a strong bond of brotherhood between his native city of Buenos Aires and the shrine to Our Lady of Bonaire in Cagliari, from an old story that recounts how, at the moment of the founding of the city, the founder had wanted to name it after the Holy Trinity, but the sailors who had brought him there were Sardinian, and they wanted him to call the city Our Lady of Buenos Aires, or of the Fair Winds. They argued, and negotiations followed, deciding on the rather long name of the City of the Holy Trinity and Port of Our Lady of Buenos Aires. But in the end, only the last 2 words remained, Buenos Aires, for the Italian shrine of Our Lady of Bonaire.
Ma è per la Madonna vostra.
And finally, Pope Francis had an audience with the ambassadors of Kyrgyzstan, Antigua and Barbuda, Luxembourg and Botswana as they all presented their credentials. In his address to the ambassadors, he spoke about ethics and the financial crisis. Now you can read the full text of that address on our blog, saltandlighttv.org/blog. It's been a bit of a slow week in terms of resignations and nominations. Pope Francis is paying special attention, though, to South America. In Argentina, he made the rector of the National Pontifical University an archbishop. Father Victor Manuel Fernandez becomes an archbishop, but he remains rector of the Pontifical Universidad Católica. Bishop-elect Fernandez worked on the development of the Aparecida document issued after the CELAM meeting in Brazil in 2007. Pope Francis appointed a new bishop for Cuernavaca, Mexico. Bishop Ramon Castro was previously Bishop of Campeche, Mexico. He moves to Cuernavaca, where there are about 2.2 million Catholics. Finally, the Vatican announced this week that retired Scottish Cardinal Keith O'Brien will leave Scotland for a time of prayer, spiritual renewal, and penance. Cardinal O'Brien, of course, stepped down just before the conclave after admitting to sexual misconduct. In a statement, the Vatican also said any future decision about how long he will stay out of Scotland or where he will live will have to be decided in agreement with the Vatican. Well, it's time to answer your questions again this week. Monica sent us a message on Facebook. Now, she said, "Great show, and why isn't Pope Francis staying in the Papal Palace?" Well, Monica, first of all, thank you for sending us your question. Now, to the answer. The Vatican said that he felt more comfortable in the Santa Marta guest house. My connections tell me it's a little bit more than that. The Santa Marta was built specifically to house cardinals during a conclave. So when it's not being used for that, when there's no conclave, it functions as a guest house, a sort of hotel for priests and bishops who have to come to the Vatican for meetings. It's also the place where Vatican officials live when they first move to Vatican City and are waiting for their permanent apartment to be ready. Meals are served in a common dining room, and there is a large chapel for residents and guests to use, and there are also several conference rooms that are often used for meetings. Most importantly, there are always people coming and going, and there's always someone to talk to. It's a much simpler style than the papal apartment in the Apostolic Palace. The Vatican did say Pope Francis's decision to live at the Santa Marta is not permanent, but it really doesn't look like he's in any rush to move. Vatican Connections is interactive. Send us your questions or comments by Facebook, Twitter, email, or post. Via email, send comments to info@saltandlighttv.org, and by post, send letters to 114 Richmond Street East, Toronto, Ontario, M5C 1P1, Canada. This week on our Roman Profile, we're going to take a look at the Vatican's liturgy office. Catholic News Service spoke with Abbot Michael Zielinski about his role as the head of the Vatican's liturgy office and the relationship between art and faith.
I think that much of the crisis in the Church, in the spiritual life of the Church, and in the spiritual lives of the people of God, has to do with the liturgical crises. A faithful celebration of the liturgy makes for faithful and holy people of God. Now, with regards to our office and the problem of art and the problem of architecture and music, well, it's the problem of contemporary art. But what is contemporary and what is art? A lot of that which is called contemporary art today is so subjective, and if I even may say egocentric, that you almost have to go with a sledgehammer to get into the message, to get into the communication that's being made. And often the artist is only communicating to himself. And even that communication is so flawful because it's so deep and irrational. Contemporary art today has almost no respect for its ability to communicate a message, to give a message. The artist, if he's going to put himself into service for the liturgy, he has to be aware that this liturgy is going to convert him. It's going to at least evangelize him. It's going to teach him something. It's going to teach him how to occupy space. It's going to teach him how to occupy space at a certain moment, at a certain time. It's also going to give him an input of ideas, themes, that he's going to have to meditate and reflect on. Even though he'll give it a personal style, it has to be able to communicate, to enter into this ritual flow. It has to be able to become part of the whole.
That's it for this week's edition of Vatican Connections. Don't forget, you can get daily updates on our Twitter feed at Vatican Connections, or on our blog you can read full papal texts. From everyone here, thank you for watching and see you next time.